I had a question as far as historical study goes, and academically trained scholars, any traditionally trained scholars, how does the conception of time and as linear versus different cultures having different ways of conceptualizing time, how does that work into the framework of looking at the past?
Well, because I am who I am, that is, I'm a product of the United States and a believer in the religion of Islam, I definitely have the idea that time is, that the intellection of time, or the understanding of time as a series of moments in a linear pattern is, or represents progress over views that are not like that. And so I have to admit that that's part of the way I am constructed, and I am not able to say that another way of looking at that is superior. And I regard it as progress because it is part of the adoption of literate culture, which enables us to record events and to hang them on pegs of time, using the counting of time in order to count. Now, the most obvious counting is the alternation of day and night. And that is the most basic, which is something that had to be with any human beings, no matter how primitive. There always had to be this concept of counting the day and night. So that's the most obvious counting. Other countings than that are not very obvious. Another counting that seemed to be the clearest and easiest and not too lengthy, and probably the second in antiquity of gaining time as a concept, is counting the moon. And you can count the moons because you see the moons, especially if you live in a place where it's clear and not cloudy. And so you can count the phases of the moon and count the cycles of the moon. And then the other one was counting the cycle of the sun, which is much less obvious. Because, of course, the sun goes north and south in the summer and winter, especially in higher latitudes. In the equator, that's not visible at all. But in the higher latitudes, it goes north and south, so that's one thing where you could count summers and winters. And that seems to be more basic, maybe, than counting the years. But they also were able to see how the sun moved in the zodiac, and so they could also define the years quite exactly. And it was very famous that the Egyptians were able to define the solar year as 365 days, which was only off by 1/4 of a day. And that was, in other words, an excellent definition of the length of years. But having that did not immediately mean that they could make a general chronology out of it. So what they did was they recorded the number of years of the king, and they counted the years by the years of the king. And when the king died, they started counting over. Worse, sometimes the king would make his son co-king during his own lifetime, and then the co-king would start counting the years in his father's reign. And of course that would mean later people would come along and think, oh well, this new count started after his father died, and it didn't necessarily. So sometimes that made the chronology too long. And so anyway, this type of thinking, say, would contrast with very primitive people who would not, having no writing, would have no means of preserving memory of distant historical events chronologically. And that would be the way in which such people would have no memory before the time of their great-great-grandparents. That would be the absolute limit. And because their lifespans were short, more likely you could say that the limit would be the lives of their great-grandparents. Not that they would know their great-grandparents themselves, but they would have access to the memories of their parents and would remember their parents and grandparents. And so you could get back to the great-grandparents or maybe the great-great-grandparents. And this still can be seen in family history, so you can test it in your own family history and see from oral tradition in your relatives how far back you can get. Like I had traditions that came down about some of my great-grandparents, not all of them, but some of them without investigating any written documents or anything, just pure oral tradition, such as my great-grandfather who fought on the Confederate side in the Civil War. And you can get some information like that. See, but then before that, the people are all irrelevant, and there isn't any thought of reconstructing it or recording history in general. And you can see when history came online in different countries, it varied. So in Ethiopia, for example, the beginning of history is in the 14th century, when the Ethiopians started writing their own history in Ethiopic. Before that, they did not. So earlier Ethiopic history depends on excavated or standing inscriptions of ancient kings and things like that. So some of the ancient history can be known and reconstructed as well. And many places cultivated no history. So the Hindus, for example, of South Asia, wrote no history until the 19th century. There was no Hindu history of anything until the 19th century. That is, the Muslims even moved into India in great numbers in around 1200, when the Sultanate of Delhi was founded, and brought historians with them right at the very outset of Muslim India. And the Hindus never took that up from the Muslims. They never adopted the genre of history writing from the Muslims, even though there were lots of Hindu elites that dealt with the Muslims and cooperated with the sultans and so on. And they never took up the genre of history writing. It just simply did not exist in their thinking. And so therefore you might say that Hindus have more of a cyclical concept of history and so on. But even a cyclical concept is like saying what goes around comes around. You know, I mean, we have that too.